The wind howled across the prairie like a ghost with unfinished business. Dust spun up from the dry earth, catching the last rays of sunlight as the sky deepened into twilight. Mara Gable stood at the edge of her porch, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Her cotton dress whipped around her legs, and her hands, roughened by hard years, were clasped tight at her waist. Below the porch, her son Eli chased a young colt around the corral. The animal was skittish, but Eli's laughter rose, above the wind. For a moment, that sound pulled a smile from Mara, fleeting and sad. Behind her, the door creaked. She didn't turn. "He's getting better with that horse," came a voice, deep and slow. "Only a matter of time before he breaks it," she said, watching Eli tumble in the dirt and bounce back up with the kind of boundless energy she had, long forgotten. Sheriff Wade Tiller stepped out onto the porch, tipping his hat back with a casual thumb. He was a man who'd once stood tall but now carried himself like someone ducking invisible blows. "I passed some folks on my way here. Said they saw Cassie and Holt's boys riding this way." Mara's face tightened. "They've been circling for weeks, looking for cracks." Tiller didn't respond immediately. Instead, he spat off the side of the porch and leaned on a post. "I can't protect you if he decides to push." "You mean you won't?" Mara said flatly. He shifted his weight. "You've got a deed, but Holt's got men, and no jury west of the Divide's gonna challenge his claim once he has it in hand. Dane gave his life for this land," she said. Her voice caught in her throat, but she swallowed it down. "He bought it fair and legal." Tiller sighed and adjusted his belt. "I didn't come to fight, Mara. I came to warn you. That man's not just greedy, he's got a mean streak. You should consider selling, taking the boy somewhere safer." "And where would that be, Sheriff?" she asked, finally turning to look at him. "Where's safer for a woman with a dead husband and a child to raise? Where the law's made of dust and bribes?" The sheriff had no answer, just a weary nod. "Then at least keep your doors locked." He tipped his hat again, then ambled down the steps and mounted his horse. Mara watched him go. Her gaze lingered on the fading horizon as if it might yield something more than silence. Eli came running up the steps, cheeks flushed and hair full of dirt. "Did you see that, Ma? He almost let me ride him." "I saw, sweetheart," she said, brushing the hair from his eyes. "You're gonna be better than your father was with horses." "You think so?" "I know so." He beamed, and she felt her heart ache. Not from sadness, yet, but from the terrifying depth of love she had for the boy. She feared nothing more than losing him. Later that night, Mara sat by the oil lamp writing in a worn leather-bound ledger. It held more than just numbers. Tucked between its pages were old photographs, a faded marriage certificate, and a letter from Dane written in a shaking hand the day before he passed. Eli was asleep upstairs, one hand dangling off the bed, his toy horse still clutched in his fingers. She heard it before she saw it, the soft clop of hooves on packed earth. Someone approaching. She stood, her heart hammering. A lone rider appeared through the darkness, silhouetted against the last vestiges of dusk. The horse was a weathered gray, its rider hunched, a wide-brimmed hat low over his eyes. But the walk when he dismounted, that slow, deliberate gait, was unmistakable. She opened the door before he could knock. "Silas." The man looked up. His face was older than she remembered. The lines were deeper, the beard grayer. But his eyes, steely and distant, had not changed. "Mara," he said with a nod. She stepped aside without a word, and he entered. Inside, the tension softened, only slightly. He removed his hat and laid it on the table. "You came," she said after a beat. "I gave my word to Dane," he replied. "Didn't seem right to let time rot it." She looked at him carefully. "You heard." Silas nodded. "He wrote me, before the end, told me what he'd done, what he asked of you, and what he asked of me. I never expected him to choose you," she said. There wasn't bitterness in her voice, only quiet confusion. "I wasn't sure I was the right man either," Silas replied, "but he trusted me. That's hard to ignore. She nodded slowly. We've managed, Eli and me, but there's trouble brewing. I passed Cassian's men 2 towns back. Loud, drunk, acting like they already owned the place. They think if they lean hard enough, I'll cave. They don't know you. Mara gave a faint smile. They don't. Upstairs, the floor creaked as Eli shifted in his sleep. He doesn't know who you are, she said after a moment. Maybe. That's for the best. No, she said. He should know. You were his father's closest friend. Silas said nothing for a moment. Then, tomorrow. I'll tell him tomorrow. The lamp flickered, throwing shadows that danced across the walls. Silence settled between them again. Not awkward, but heavy with memory. Mara broke it. You never stopped carrying that guilt, did? You? Silas didn't answer directly. I left the gun behind, but the weight never really goes away. She studied him. I don't need a killer, Silas. I need someone who'll protect my son. He looked at her then, really looked. I can be both. The next morning, Eli's eyes widened when he met Silas. You're the one who rode with Pa, he said. Mouth half full of biscuits, Silas grunted. That was a long time ago. You really shoot like they say? Only when I have to. Mara watched them with quiet hope. Silas, despite his years and scars, had a calming presence. Eli wasn't afraid of him, only curious. They spent the morning mending a fence line, the boy asking questions Silas mostly answered with nods or grunts. But as they worked, Silas noticed something. Hoofprints near the water trough. Too many. Too fresh. He went still. Take Eli inside, he said low. Mara looked up sharply. Why? Now. She didn't argue. She called Eli and he ran to her. Silas knelt and touched the ground. 5 riders, maybe 6. Cassian's men. They were probing, measuring the house's defenses. He stood and scanned the ridgeline. No visible riders, but he felt it, eyes watching. The air itself seemed to bristle, with warning. That night, Silas sat outside with his rifle across his knees. The moon was thin, the stars cold and distant. Every coyote howl felt closer than it should. Every rustle in the grass made his grip tighten. He was back in it. Back in the dance of death. But this time it wasn't about glory or vengeance. It was about something purer, something he'd never thought he'd find again. A promise to a dying man, a boy who deserved a future. He looked up at the stars and muttered, Dane, wherever you are, I'm here. Inside the house, Mara lay, awake. She could feel the coming storm. A part of her wanted to believe Silas would be enough, that his presence would scare Cassian off. But she knew better. And in the darkness of her bedroom, holding Eli's small hand in hers, she made a silent vow she would not break. Not for land, not for fear, not for Cassian Holt. And if she had to die, she would die standing. Outside, Silas remained still as stone, eyes on the shadows. The wind howled again. This time it carried with it more than dust. It carried blood, and fire and fate. And they were all heading for the Gable Ranch, and Silas Rook would be ready. The air was thick with unease that morning. Even the sun rose reluctantly, peeking through streaks of gray cloud like a man uncertain he wanted to witness what the day would bring. Mara Gable stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing at a plate that didn't need scrubbing. Her eyes flicked again and again to the window, scanning the wide-open land for movement. Eli sat at the table, chewing on a piece of jerky, a book open in front of him. He wasn't really reading. His fingers toyed with the hem of his shirt, eyes darting toward his mother when he thought she wouldn't notice. The tension in the house had thickened overnight, and he felt it even if he didn't understand it. Silas. Rook was outside again, repairing the outer gate with a hammer and thick nails. His movements were methodical, quiet. He worked like a man who didn't trust the silence and wanted to fill it, but every now and then his eyes would lift toward The ridgeline. Every time they came back harder. You think they're coming today? Mara asked without looking at him when he came back inside, brushing dust from his sleeves. Feels like it. She nodded. Her lips tightened, but she said nothing more. Let me take you both into town, Silas said, voice low. There's time. Mara turned sharply. No, if we leave now we lose the land, and we lose what Dane fought for. You'll lose more than that if they come knocking, he said. Her voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. This is our home, Eli's home. If I run now I teach him fear. I won't do that. Silas watched her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. Then we make it ready. They spent the next hours preparing. Silas reinforced the door. Mara packed a small satchel, not because she planned to run, but because instinct whispered to be ready for anything. She put it near the front closet. Eli followed them both, asking questions that were only half answered. As dusk fell, the air turned, still. Then came the hooves, a slow, steady beat on the earth, not fast, deliberate, like a warning knock on the door of fate. Silas stepped onto the porch with his rifle in hand. Mara moved Eli behind her, her hand firm on his shoulder. 6 men rode out of the brush, shadows on horseback. At the front rode Cassian Holt, sitting tall on a black stallion, wearing a long duster that fluttered like wings in the wind. His face bore a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Evenin', folks, he called, voice lazy and low. Heard you had some property you were reconsidering. Silas raised the rifle slightly. Turn around. Cassian ignored him. His gaze locked on Mara. You've been given time to think, Miss Gable, and now I'm thinking maybe you've run out of it. I'm not selling, Mara said. Her voice did not tremble. That's a damn shame, Cassian said with a sigh. See, I was hoping we could do this civil. I got legal papers that say this land's got my name on it. I have the deed signed and witnessed, she snapped back. He shrugged. Papers burn. You need to leave, Silas growled. Now. Cassian's smile widened. Silas Rook, I thought I smelled something musty in the wind. He leaned forward in his saddle. You come to play hero again, old man? Silas didn't respond. He didn't need to. Cassian nodded to one of his men. Suddenly, everything exploded. The gunshot rang like thunder, shattering the moment. A window burst inward. Mara dropped, pulling Eli down with her, covering him with her body. Silas fired once, then twice, taking down a rider whose horse reared and bolted. But the outlaws didn't ride away. They surged forward. Chaos erupted around the house. The door splintered under a boot. Silas moved like lightning, dragging a dresser across the entrance. He turned and saw Mara and Eli crawling toward the cellar. A second shot cracked through the wall, missing by inches. Mara! Go! But she didn't make it. A figure appeared in the shattered doorway, Jeremiah Bones Cutter, wide-eyed and grinning, gun raised. Mara tried to push Eli behind her, but Bones was faster. Little runt don't need to see this world, he muttered. The gun fired. Eli jerked, then crumpled. Mara screamed. Time slowed. Silas turned too late. Bones vanished back into the chaos. Mara dropped to the ground, her arms wrapping around her son's body, blood pooling beneath her. She rocked him back and forth, whispering his name over and over again, her voice breaking apart with each syllable. Silas stormed forward. Bullets, flying past him. He didn't feel them. He only saw Mara's eyes, wide, shattered, pleading. The remaining outlaws pulled back. Cassian gave a sharp whistle, and like shadows they melted into the night. The damage was done. The message was delivered. Silas knelt beside Mara, his chest heaving. She looked up at him, her face bloodied with dust and tears. He's gone, she whispered. Silas stared at Eli's still body, his own heart breaking along an old seam that had never healed right. I'm sorry, he said. You said you'd protect him. Her voice was not cruel, but it cut him just the same. I was too late, he said. She nodded slowly, like that truth had weight she couldn't carry. Her breath came in short, broken gasps. She clutched Eli tighter, then loosened her grip, as if her arms could no longer hold on to anything. I can't breathe, she said. Silas caught her as she swayed. Her hands trembled in his. Blood, her son's, was streaked across her chest and face. Mara, stay with me. Her eyes fluttered. Promise me. You'll find them. I will. Make them suffer, like he did. I swear it. She exhaled, soft and final, like a candle snuffed out. Silas held her, the bodies of mother and son cradled in his arms, in the ruins of a home once full of life. His jaw clenched so hard it ached. His eyes stung, but no tears came. His grief had no room. It had already been filled by fury. He buried them at dawn. The sun rose blood red. 2 graves, side by side, under the old cottonwood tree near the corral. He carved their names into stone by hand, his knuckles raw, his breath shallow. The ranch house still smoked. The front door lay in pieces. The wind pushed ashes across the floorboards like ghosts refusing to rest. Silas went inside and stood in the center of the ruined room. On the table lay Eli's toy horse, one leg broken. He picked it up, held it for a long moment, then slipped it into his coat. He walked to the closet, opened the trunk Dane had left him. Inside lay his old gun belt, wrapped in oilcloth. He unrolled it slowly. The revolvers still gleamed. He strapped them on with trembling hands. Then he looked into the mirror. Not Silas Rook, the tired man who mended fences. Silas Rook, the gunslinger, the man who had once ended wars between outlaws with 6 bullets and a stare. The man who had buried too many, but never one as innocent as that boy. He took his hat from the hook, pushed the brim low over his eyes, and walked out, into the light. The graves sat behind him, silent witnesses. He mounted his horse and turned east, toward Devil's Hollow, toward Cassian Holt. He didn't look back. There was nothing left behind him now but smoke and sorrow. And ahead, retribution. Silas Rook rode through the morning haze with a silence that unnerved the world around him. Birds didn't sing as he passed. Rabbits dove into holes. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. His horse, a graying Mustang named Flint, sensed the change. Each hoofbeat was a thud against the earth like a war drum, steady and cold. He didn't ride fast. Vengeance didn't need haste, only certainty. Devil's Hollow was 2 days east, tucked between the mesas and the dry riverbeds where outlaws made their nests like vultures. Cassian Holt ran the place like a king without a crown, and his men, those still breathing, would be heading back there, full of liquor and false victory. Silas had one name burning through his mind: Jeremiah Bones Cutter. Bones had pulled the trigger. Cassian had given the order. The rest were accomplices to a massacre. He didn't see them as men anymore. Only names on a list waiting to be crossed off. By midday, Silas arrived at Buckskin Junction, a crossroads town with 1 saloon, a blacksmith, and a sheriff who didn't ask questions. Dust swirled around the buildings like a shroud. He dismounted, tied Flint at the trough, and stepped into the saloon. Conversations died the moment the doors creaked open. Cards hit tabletops, bottles paused mid-air. Every eye landed on Silas, and not a one could meet his stare for long. He stepped to the bar. Whiskey. The bartender, a wiry man with a crooked mustache, poured it without a word. Silas downed it in one pull. I'm looking for Bones Cutter. Cassian Holt's men came through here. The bartender blinked. You know their kind. Loud, drunk, looking for something to shoot. Where'd they go? East, the bartender muttered. Devil's Hollow. Who was with him? Bones. Lyle Mercer, that Mexican fella, Delgado, and a boy with a twitch, they call him Pisspot. Silas turned. Thanks. A man at the far table laughed nervously. You think you're gonna take him alone, old-timer? Silas stared at him. I ain't gonna think about it. Then he walked out. By nightfall, he had made camp under a ridge, building a fire only big enough to heat coffee and cast a sliver of light. He sat cross-legged, sharpening his knife, checking his bullets one by one. Each motion was quiet, methodical. There was no joy in what he was planning, only necessity. He couldn't sleep. Images of Mara's face, pale and trembling, flickered before his eyes. Eli's small body, limp in her arms. The sound of that one gunshot. It replayed again and again until it carved a permanent place in his soul. He leaned against a rock and looked up at the stars. "I'll make it right," he whispered. The next day he spotted smoke before noon. A campfire trail. He dismounted, tied Flint behind a cluster of rocks, and moved low along the ridge. Below, in a shallow valley, sat the remnants of the outlaw. Gang Bones Cutter, Lyle Mercer, and the others lounged around the fire, laughing, drinking, careless. Cassian was not with them. Good. Silas didn't want to rush that part. He counted 4. He had 6 bullets in each revolver. That would be more than enough. He moved with ghostly quiet down the slope, every footstep placed with precision. By the time the first outlaw looked up, Silas was already in the open. "Cutter," he said. They froze. Bones blinked, confused. "Who the hell?" Silas drew. The crack of the first shot shattered the calm. Lyle Mercer's head snapped back, a hole between his eyes. Delgado scrambled for his rifle, too slow. Silas fired again. The bullet punched through the man's shoulder, spinning him to the dirt. Bones yelled, reaching for his own weapon. Silas walked forward. "Don't," he said, but Bones did. The shot went wide. Silas didn't miss. The slug tore through Bones. "Cut!" He dropped with a howl, clutching himself, writhing. Pisspot bolted. Silas turned and winged him in the leg. The kid tumbled hard and didn't rise. Silas moved to Bones, crouched low. "You remember me?" Bones spat blood. You was with that boy." Silas didn't blink. His name was Eli. Bones groaned, curling in on himself. "You shot a child, unarmed, in his own home. What does that make you?" "I didn't. You did." Bones reached for a knife. Silas stood and shot him again, this time through the chest. The body jerked, then went still. Delgado was moaning nearby. Silas walked over, gun raised. "Please," the man gasped, blood pouring between his fingers. Silas hesitated. Delgado had been there. He'd helped burn the place. But his hands hadn't been the ones to kill the boy, not directly. Still, he'd watched, and done nothing. Silas fired. 1 bullet. Mercy was a luxury he didn't carry anymore. Only Pisspot remained, crawling away, whimpering. Silas walked up behind him. "Please, I didn't want to. They made me ride along. I didn't shoot no one, I swear it." "Where's Cassian?" "I don't know." Silas aimed. Wait, he's back in Hollow Ridge. They've got a mine out there, turned the old church into a saloon. That's his place now. He don't let no one in unless he trusts them." "What? About Holt's schedule?" "He's there most nights, drunk, surrounded by 3 guards, more on weekends, women too. It's a fortress." Silas lowered the gun. "You tell anyone you saw me and I'll finish what I started." The boy nodded, eyes wide with terror. Silas turned and walked away. He left the bodies in the dirt. He didn't bury them. That honor was reserved for the decent. By the time the sun touched the horizon, he was already riding again, toward Devil's Hollow, toward the end. He slept in short bursts under the stars that night, and when he dreamed, it was of Eli laughing in the corral, chasing the colt, sun in his hair. That dream shattered as quickly as it came, replaced by gunfire and blood. He rode with purpose now. There were only a few names left. Cassian Holt, the man who thought himself untouchable, and Silas Rook, the man who had nothing left to lose. By the time Devil's Hollow appeared before him, dusk was painting the cliffs red. A storm was coming, one with no rain, only fire. Devil's Hollow crouched beneath the cliffs like a coiled snake, half shadowed by the mountains, half sunken in dust. What had once been a God-fearing town was now rotted through with vice, saloons humming with drunken laughter, poker halls, run-on threats and Cassian Holt's Fortress Saloon rising in the center like a monument to lawlessness. Its facade still bore the carved steeple of the chapel it had once been. Now behind those stained glass windows, sin-replaced sermons. Silas Rook sat at the edge of a ravine overlooking the town. Flint grazed behind him, quiet and calm despite the scent of danger that choked the air. Silas studied Devil's Hollow, like a man memorizing the layout of his own grave. He had mapped the perimeter, tracked the guards, and counted the windows. He'd learned the shifts, the routes, the weak points. Cassian would be inside by now, whiskey in hand, surrounded by his hired killers and a handful of girls paid to pretend they liked the taste of his voice. The man had always loved the sound of himself more than anything. Silas holstered both revolvers, their weight familiar now, like old bones that had grown back into his body. He rose with purpose, the setting sun staining the sky in blood and amber. He entered town just as the lamps were being lit. No one recognized him, or if they did, no one dared speak it aloud. His hat brim hung low. His coat, long and dust-caked, concealed everything but the slow, sure rhythm of his walk. Each step carried history. Each step promised reckoning. The first man to notice was a guard leaning against the church doors chewing a cigar stub. He narrowed his eyes and shifted forward. "You lost, friend?" "No." Silas didn't slow. I said, the revolver fired before the sentence finished. The guard dropped with a thud, his cigar still smoldering in the dirt. The doors slammed open. Chaos spilled into the air. Inside, the saloon went from music and laughter to drawn weapons and overturned tables in a blink. Silas stepped in. Smoke, curling from his barrel, eyes sweeping the room like a tide. 3 men flanked the balcony with rifles. 2 more crouched behind overturned tables. Cassian stood at the top of the old pulpit stairs, eyes wide, lips parted in disbelief. "Well, I'll be damned," Cassian muttered. "You already are," Silas said. The second shot rang out. A man behind the bar collapsed, bottle still in hand. The rest scrambled. The girl nearest Cassian screamed and ducked as bullets ricocheted off pews and broken glass. Silas moved like lightning, firing, rolling, ducking behind the altar that once served communion and now caught lead. One of the riflemen above fired down. A chunk of wood exploded beside Silas's head. He dove left, spun, and shot upward, striking the man dead center. He toppled over the rail, crashing through a table below. Another leapt for cover, firing wild. Silas rolled again, the floorboards cracking beneath him. He emerged behind a row of chairs, raised both guns, and emptied the last of his bullets in a thunderous barrage. When the smoke cleared, the only ones breathing were Silas and Cassian. The outlaw stood alone now, dust on his boots and blood on his shirt, not his own, not yet. His pistol was drawn, but his hand trembled. "You got the devil in you, Rook." Silas reloaded in silence, calm as still water. "Could have walked away," Cassian said, voice low. "Could have left this all buried." "I buried a boy," Silas said, "and a woman who died watching him go. There ain't no walking away from that." Cassian laughed bitterly. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Cutter, he got too eager. Didn't want no kids screaming when we were trying to make a deal." "You call that a deal?" "It was business," Cassian roared. "I didn't pull the trigger." "But you handed him the gun," Silas said. He stepped forward. Cassian raised his weapon and fired once. The bullet grazed Silas's shoulder. Pain flared, but he kept walking. A second shot rang out, missed. Cassian's hand shook now, sweat running down his temple. Silas raised his revolver. No more. Words. The final shot echoed like a hammer falling on stone. Cassian Holt crumpled at the foot of the altar stairs, the same spot where he'd once claimed his kingdom. He didn't speak again. His eyes, open and vacant, stared at the ceiling he'd once rebuilt with stolen coin and fear. Silas stood still for a moment, gun raised, smoke curling around him like incense. The saloon was silent. The piano lay in splinters. Chairs were overturned, blood stained the cracked wood floor. He holstered his weapons. Behind him, a voice broke the silence. A child's voice, barely more than a whisper. "Are they gone?" Silas turned. From behind the bar, a girl emerged, No more than 12, dirt streaking her cheeks. Another followed, a boy holding her hand, trembling. Hiding, too young to understand the cost of violence, too old to forget it. They won't hurt you now, Silas said softly. Were you the one they were afraid of? She asked. He knelt in front of her, voice low. No, I was the one who waited too long. She didn't understand, but she nodded anyway. He walked them outside, into the cooling night. Word had already spread. The saloon lit behind them like a beacon of death, the symbol of Cassian's rule finally broken. People peeked from behind shutters. Some stepped onto porches. No one dared approach. Silas helped the children onto a wagon and pointed toward the trail. Ride west. There's a town called Coldwater. They'll take you in. The boy clutched the reins. Who are you? Silas smiled, just barely, just a man who didn't forget. He slapped the horse's flank and the wagon rolled off into the dark. He turned back to the town that had once been a den of thieves. It was quiet now, hushed, the kind of silence that came not from fear but from endings. He walked out of Devil's Hollow the same way he'd entered, alone, steady, without pause. The blood on his coat was dry. His shoulder throbbed, but the pain grounded him, reminded him he was still here, still standing. Outside town, Flint waited, tied to the post of an old sign that once read, "Welcome to Redemption," now cracked in half. Silas mounted up and looked back one last time. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He just tipped his hat to the graves in his heart. Then he rode on, toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to rise again. Faint, uncertain, but rising all the same. And behind him, in a town that had long since stopped dreaming of justice, silence gave way to whispers, of a man named Rook, of a past that caught fire, and of a reckoning that rode in with dust on his boots and thunder in his hands.